Hello and welcome to the first episode of Chinwag at the Odyssey. I am full of beans because we have with us Fatima Sattar. She is the writer of Kamli, the most beautiful film from Pakistan, and I'm really excited to have her here. Assalamu alaikum, Fatima.
Walaikum Assalam. Thank you so much for having me and
Well,
saying
thank you
nice things.
so much for being here. I'm really grateful that you're here. Fatma, I want to talk about Kamli first. So, Kamli was a short story, if I'm not wrong.
So it was a short film
Okay.
by Meher Banu.
Okay.
It was her thesis film from NCA. Sarmad acquired the rights for it and he narrated the story to me कि ऐसे ऐसे short film है and we want to adapt it into a feature,
Okay.
expand it and add more plot. And Sarmad had a few ideas on how to convert it into a feature.
Right.
And that's when I started working on it, on the screenplay, और उसको फिर feature में adapt किया था.
And how long was that process?
The writing process, I think it spanned over a year. Yeah, but उसके आखिरी कुछ months में we started with the pre-production of the film as well. क्योंकि जो end वाले drafts थे, they were mostly, getting the language right. तो वो simultaneously हो रहा था, but the writing process took over a year.
Took over a year.
Yes.
Okay. And when you took over this project,
Yeah.
was there a specific direction that you were supposed to follow? Because this is here you're taking a project that's already is a short film, and then you are converting it into a feature. तो उसकी क्या कोई restrictions या कोई constraints थे?
Yes. So, there were also there was a lot of creative freedom on how I wanted to take the story, but there were some limitations that were on the table since the beginning.
Sure.
One of them being that it needed to have 5 songs. That
Okay.
was pre-decided,
ठीक.
right? So I then और क्योंकि एक rough story arc पता थी कि ऐसा होना है, तो एक वो limitation थी. But
सही.
within that, I actually feel like it's very interesting to have these limitations rather than a complete freedom because
Of course. Gives you more structure.
yeah, and how you work around it, वो एक थोड़े से challenges मजे के लगते हैं.
Sure.
Especially with songs in a screenplay, that's like a writer's nightmare because you're like, how do you keep the tension intact? When you know
When
that
there's a song.
when there's a song coming up. So, but I really enjoyed doing that because I wanted the songs to be like scenes and the story should progress.
Follow through from the songs. It's just flowing. The story doesn't stop.
So it actually adds on to the story more. Like the songs, they're literally scenes. If you take out the music, they're scenes. Even though the music is one of the most beautiful things about the film that I feel.
Of course.
So उस तरह की limitations थी, but within that there was a lot of things that allowed me to explore more in terms of the visual language that we're going to use, the
that's
symbology, the kind of nuances in actors, characters,
Sahi.
the way they handle situations. So yeah.
And so I want to ask you, कि when you were handed over the story, what did you first think? What was your instant reaction to reading it? Or,
So it was narrated to me.
Yeah, it was narrated
to me, and
what did you think about it?
So I found it very, especially the second half of the story, I found that very much in sync with the kind of work that I want to make and that I am interested in. So I like, things where you bend reality a bit, where magical realism sort of comes in.
There's
So
this surrealism.
yeah,
in the
yeah, yeah.
film.
So I found कि इसमें जो भी ये structure है, इसमें there's a lot of window for me to play with these elements.
Sahi.
It didn't restrain me to a certain realism, right?
Right,
I had that freedom to explore. So I was very excited. This was my first film as a writer, and I didn't expect to
How
work.
daunting was that?
It was very much, but I'm really glad that people like Sarmad, they give opportunity to younger writers because people in Pakistan, they don't.
Oh, that is vital for our film industry to grow and forget film industry, for us to have better stories and clearer and more comprehensive and nuanced narratives. We have to have young people write.
Yeah. So I was obviously very grateful to be given this project because I was a nobody. I still am a nobody, but I was very happy.
Don't be too hard.
And then obviously the whole environment of people who were on this project, since the pre-production phase. It was a very nurturing place for me as a writer, whether it was Kavalappa or Sarmad himself, and how if I had some very vague ideas, they actually nurtured it into a proper screenplay. So
that must have been a wonderful experience, because sometimes it can also be daunting when you have ideas, but then you don't want them to just be ideas. You want to do something with those ideas, and to have those people around you who make that possible.
Absolutely,
that's a blessing.
Yes. And also, like I always call myself a filmmaker first, then a writer, because I think I can only write for screen.
Okay.
Because I write it like it comes to me in a visual language rather than I think I'm really bad with words.
Oh, I mean,
but
you're not bad with words. Come on.
But I feel very comfortable when I'm writing for screen, and also how it's a collaborative process, and how everybody who is on the team they add so many layers to the screenplay that you write. Whether it's your art director and the actors themselves and the choreographer. तो उससे वो बन के जो मतलब जो finished product होता है for films.
That's more richer.
Yeah, even if it's different from how you envision it as a writer, because कुछ चीजें कवली में ऐसी थी जो maybe मैंने थोड़ा सा differently सोचा होगा, पर वो execute उस time पे आपका वो होता है कि अच्छा this is how you wrote it, but later on when I look back at it, I'm glad that it wasn't executed the way I wrote it, and people brought in their inputs.
Their own input. But this is interesting when you say कि कई दफ़ा, and this is true of all creative processes, you envision things in a certain way, and sometimes the end product, because there's so many other people involved in it, it's slightly different than what you had envisioned.
Yeah.
But क्या कभी ये difficult भी होता है, because creative people can also be married to an idea, because that is their baby.
Yes.
So वो क्या उसमें भी थोड़ी कोई difficulty भी होती है?
It is. I mean, naturally it is difficult. It affects you, and like you said, we're married to the idea or to that version of that idea, right? Yeah. But I think for me, I like to discipline myself in ways that there are ways where you have to step away from the project. You have to trust other people with it.
Yeah.
Because if you don't do that, then I feel like there's no growth. I mean, even if suppose if something goes wrong, that in itself is a learning experience, but it has to go through that process.
Definitely.
So I discipline myself a lot with that.
Achha.
I maybe like 6 years ago I wouldn't be okay with somebody completely changing my project, but now I am.
Yeah.
I actually like to hear different directors' versions of the stories that I've written.
That's very interesting that you say this, because I also feel कि filmmaking के अंदर और ये जितने भी creative aspects हैं, इनके अंदर until and unless you're okay with sometimes stepping back and sometimes taking the input, तब तक तो वो collaborative एक तो process होता नहीं है. And secondly, it becomes impossible to do anything, because you have to work with a team जिसमें सबकी ही almost is equal input.
Because and you have to let people do that, because see, if you have anybody on the team, whether it's on your creative side, even if it's your gaffers or anything, they know their expertise, right?
Absolutely.
Your costume designer knows their expertise,
and you have to work with them.
And you have to trust their vision more than, of course, I mean, that doesn't mean that you lose your aesthetic or lose the intentions of your balance, but there's a balance. And from all the work I've done so far, it has always been a really good outcome when people have collaborated. I've never felt like कि किसी ने ये खराब कर दिया है, कब किसी ने इसको बुरा कर दिया, but ऐसा कभी नहीं हुआ मेरे साथ.
Nice. Fatima, going back to the very first narration, what was at that point the genesis of Kamli, the story? क्या उस वक्त कोर था और किस तरह से उस कोर को फिर आपने maintain किया in writing the entire film?
I think what we, Sarmad and I, really tried to, wanted to say with this film was, how women, how they deal with certain things, and mostly how they're depicted is not how it is in reality.
True. Very true.
Especially in cinema or TV, or in this part of the world. So we wanted to stick true to things like whether it's female desire, or if it's the women who are left behind when people leave what happens to the house that's left behind, what happens to the women that are left behind. But we didn't want to force any message or any
I love that.
how do I say it, any themes on it. So that was probably what we were trying to do with the story since day one. Yeah. And we wanted it to be as honest as we could make it.
I mean, it's definitely one of the most honest pieces I have seen, because जो भी बातें अभी आपने की हैं, I almost felt like there were tears popping in my eyes, because when you talk about female desire, or when you talk about women who are left alone to deal with the circumstances and life, it was so beautifully done. And सबसे जो मज़े की बात मुझे कमली की लग रही थी, और मैं उसको इस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में भी देखता हूँ, that there's this film, big budgeted Hollywood film that released, which was Barbie, and it was like forcing their message. It wasn't subtle. It was like shouting from the rooftop, feminism, this is about feminism. I think Kamli is a very feminist narrative. But not for a split second do I feel कि मुझे किसी ने कहा है, या the story is leading me in that direction. So वो labeling नहीं है कमली में कहीं भी. Even though बहुत feminist story है, it is about women and the tribulations that they have in their own particular lives, and how their lives then interconnect, and how maybe the tribulations also explode when they sort of are with one another. But never does it feel like कि कोई tagging हुई हुई है इस पे.
I'm glad. But I feel like when we use words like feminism and other isms for films, especially in all these cinemas, we ignore a big chunk of domestic settings, and domestic women.
Definitely.
And to me, that's just my personal opinion. I feel like I've heard of so many feminist stories coming from within a domestic setting.
Absolutely, yes. I concur with you. Totally concur.
So it always, I feel irritated when, if you want to show an empowered woman, you have to take her out of the domestic setting. But I feel like there are so many, heroic stories within the domestic settings. So maybe that's...
I completely concur with you. I think feminism ka bhi, the depiction of feminism in film has also been stereotyped now.
For like some cases, yes.
So many cases that you see ke, if you want to talk about it and you want to label it, then it has to be shown in a certain way. I mean, with Kamli, none of that happened, even though it was a very feminist narrative. And I really applaud you for it, Fatima.
Thank you so much. That's very kind of you.
Now, Fatima, I want to also understand कि आपकी Kamli की situation में तो the story was already, part of the story was already there. आपकी वैसे generally what is your motivation to write? किधर से वो motivation आती है? I want to understand what goes into that genius mind of yours.
It's not a genius mind.
Come on, it
but
is.
We try. So I think it's the filming process that really excites me. Not just writing. I mean, I actually, even if I'm, just a tea person on set, I love being on set. I love seeing things translated onto the camera. Okay. And that's probably my biggest push that makes me write things. Also, of course, there are things that I want to, write stories about. I love, like, bachpan se mujhe waisi kahaniyan sunane, like I would create stories, I would create horror stories. मैं अपने cousins को बिठा के I would give them a meter 1 से 10 तक. I would be like कि कौन से level की story सुननी है, and they would tell me, and I would make up a story on spot. So I really like these kind of stories where it's speculative fiction, a bit of fantasy, a bit of magical realism. Now that I'm a bit more, like, I've been doing this since a few years, I feel most comfortable in these genres.
That's your genre of choice.
Yeah, at this stage in my life. It might change later.
It always evolves.
Yeah. So, translating that onto screen, it really, really excites me. And I have this nerdiness to, color grading and AI visuals.
I have to get to that as well, because you did the color grading for Kamli.
Kamli, yes.
And color grading mein, from the start, did you have that running along in tandem with your writing process, or is it something that you, at the very last, decided that this is the palette?
So with Kamlina, I was very much like I was very obsessive about the colors since the beginning, since the writing process.
That's what
because
we like.
when I started working on the project, I was decided to be the colorist of the film from day
Okay.
one, and I was
Okay.
also the AD on it. So I was part of the whole costumes, wali,
ठीक.
paletting. So I was very obsessive and very like I knew के
You
कौन
knew
से
what you
characters के
wanted.
क्या colors हैं, कौन से scenes के क्या colors हैं, कौन से how the colors are going to change over the film.
Okay.
And I think if you don't incorporate that in the pre-production phase, it's very hard to do it in the post-production because
Sure.
you can't change your costumes, you can't change your
It's
sets,
not-
you can't
yeah.
change that, right? Of course, there are some things that you can do in the post, but with this, it was very, very essential to do that from the beginning.
So that also did it help you in your writing process as well, because you were also the colorist. So आप palette भी determine आप कर रही हैं, तो फिर क्या उसका language पे और tonality पे कितना फर्क पड़ता है जब आप
I think-
writer भी हैं
yeah.
और आप colorist भी
Yeah,
हैं?
I think consciously शायद वो मैं इतना सोच के नहीं कर रही होती, but like I said, I think I'm a filmmaker first. तो मैं वैसे visually लिख रही होती हूँ हर चीज को. If I feel like this color should really be there, I would write it down in the script. But
Okay.
most of it comes in the pre-production phase. When we were like not, it wasn't mentioned in the script, but over there we would mention कि अच्छा now इस scenes में ये colors होंगे, इस character के costumes ये होंगे.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that can then determine the mood of
Yeah,
the
absolutely,
particular.
absolutely. I mean, it was like 2019 when we shot the film, so I might be forgetting a lot of things, but हमने हर character की color palette निकाली हुई थी. Or if you watch
Right.
the film, तो वो वही कपड़े हैं.
I know. Yeah.
So if Saba's wearing something hina, then the girl who's following her around, she has contrasting clothes. Same. If she's wearing gray, she's gonna wear like her dupatta will be gray, or मतलब वो same palette में होता है throughout the film. So ये सब चीजें पहले ही decide
Determined
की
थी
हैं.
पहले
Yes,
से.
yes.
So Fatma, when you're writing, there are certain rules of writing as well, जो कि maybe are taught generally in schools or in classes, wherever. How much do you follow the rules of writing, and how much do you say that I have my own process, and especially in terms of who is the antagonist and who is the protagonist, उसको आप किस तरह से देखती हैं, and how do you then process that in your writing?
I try to follow most of the rules
Sure.
because I'm still learning, and I feel very comfortable when the structure is the classic structure. It's
Okay.
not experimental. It's not very. So I feel very comfortable and safe when I'm writing within these barriers. But I feel like sometimes the flow does seep in without you being aware of it. So, like with Kamli, because it was 5 songs, so there's no structure that incorporates 5 songs in your story. But वहाँ पे I wrote it in bits. Like I wrote the Hina Amaltaz sequence. I wrote it separately from the film, all scenes of them, and I wrote
Really?
them like a short story first. Then I
That's
turned them
very
into
interesting.
scenes and put them in the film. So that was something that I don't usually do, but I did it in this case.
And that's not a very conventional way of writing, is it?
Yeah. I actually, like, if you read those things, that comes off like a short story on its own. All of their scenes were first written like that, not in a script format, like prose. And then I put them in the script.
That's a revelation. I think that's a very interesting thing that you just mentioned here.
But it worked for this because they were isolated from the rest of the
Rest
setting.
of the
Yeah, I just needed to
story.
know
Makes
Hina's
sense.
state of Hina's character beats for each of those scenes.
Right.
Yeah.
And how many changes do you make on set, and what do they look like?
Ideally, not a lot. And if I recall, we didn't make a lot of changes on set for Kamli. We didn't. We made a lot of changes in the edit when we were editing it. So we shot it pretty much as how it was written. But like most of the films, it turned out to be very long in the first cut.
But that's usual. Right?
That's usual. So that's where some major changes happened, and a lot of the written script parts were taken out
Right.
to make the film crispier and more inflow.
And when you're on set, and not just changing the narrative there, but in terms of language, how much does the language change depending on what the actor is comfortable with, or what they're able to deliver better, and what the director feels that we maybe need to change a word or need to change the tonality of a word. How does that
I think that varies from project to project. If there are, if actors sometimes when in rehearsals, if they want to change a dialogue or the way they're saying it, that happens there. But I haven't really experienced कि वो पूरा change हो रहा set पे.
And जब set पे, let's say even if a word changes, because a word could hold a very strong meaning.
Yeah.
What is your then way of going about it? कि किन लफ्जों पे you're like, okay, we can change this, and there are certain words that we're not changing.
I think I'm very open to these things because as long as there's a reason behind those changes,
they're okay with that.
I'm completely fine with that. And also, with Kamli, there were, if Samad was directing it, obviously, if he made a change, I don't recall dialogues changing, but if he changed, the way a scene's being executed, even if a part of me would be like, "Ye aise nahi hai," but then I would
would trust.
And I would know my boundaries. And now when I look back at it, I understand कि वो क्यों change हुई थी उस time पे.
Yeah, because maybe sometimes the captain of the ship is thinking from another perspective.
Which maybe, and hence I feel like it's very important to let go of your project. Like directors shouldn't edit, writers shouldn't edit,
definitely,
cinematographers shouldn't edit.
Yeah,
so you have to let another person take over your project.
Sure. And that's I guess this is one of the advice that you can give to all the creatives out there as well.
Of course. I feel like a lot of people get stuck when they think कि हमने ही सब कुछ करना है और हमारा ही
this is our baby and this is our vision. You have to stick to it.
Yeah.
Okay, so Fatima, what is your optimum environment to write? Do you have any quirks when it comes to writing कि मुझे ये चीज़ें चाहिए at this time of the day, or that's how the room needs to look like? What is that environment?
I mean, ideally, I would want like a very isolated space in the mountains with no human interference, no like signals, no social media. But of course, that's it's very naive of me to think that's going to happen. So, like right now, I have a home office where I just especially later during the night because I have a child as well. When I put him to sleep, that's when I get to work. I might have found these circumstances almost like they kind of take your energy and you are not able to write. But I think everybody should be resilient enough to make their way around it. So I've literally written in the car.
Have you?
Yeah, or I don't anywhere. I can do it anywhere. I try to do it anywhere.
Wow.
I don't want to make a big fuss about कि मेरी setting ऐसी होनी चाहिए. Because then I feel like you're blocking yourself and you're waiting for an ideal world to happen. The world's never ideal. Your working environment will never be ideal. You have to make way with
what you have.
What you have, yeah. Whether it's just a chair or no chair, you can just sit anywhere.
I mean, this is also fascinating that you say that you can even write while traveling.
Yeah.
This is very interesting. Okay, so Fatima, going back to Kamli now. So there is a tale that reveals itself at the end.
Yeah.
It was like a mythical tale. I was completely blown over by it, honestly. Because for me, having that tale is having a story of our own region. So it's very endemic to our own land. I mean, these are kind of tales that we've also heard as kids. And then to have that play out in such a surrealistic manner, that was very interesting for me. So, uske bare mein, can you maybe talk about that?
Yeah, so there are like, Sakina keeps narrating these stories throughout the film. She is a storyteller.
Yeah.
There's a story about Sattar ko Musafir wali.
Yes.
And then there's this Amaltas ke Ped wali. So, I mean, these are fictional. I wrote them myself.
So these were written by you, or were these part of the initial shorts?
So the initial part, the star and the wanderer, was mine entirely. The prince rescuing the woman was from the short film.
Okay.
Yeah, but the Amaltas was Sarmat's idea. The pair.
It was a wonderful idea. Honestly,
the whole Amaltas symbology is Sarmat's. But how the story happens and that was
okay,
created it.
Right. So, Fatma, is there a book or a film or a person or anything that inspires you to write, motivates you to write? Maybe it could be a moment in your life, or it could be something that still inspires you. Maybe it could be every day, it could be whenever it is.
I think like most of my inspiration is from people I've seen, met, people that I've lived with, I've observed. I feel like they always come into my work, you know, where um, I was always interested in, very like stories that were, fantasy or horror type cheeseं. Um, I take a lot of inspiration from our local folklore and mythology, especially, all these supernatural side.
We saw a lot of that in Kamli as
Yeah,
well.
yeah. So, and I also take a lot of inspiration from animals, generally, like whether it's, I find them very fascinating.
It's very interesting that you say these things because um, I go on and on about having local narratives and having things that are endemic to our land. That's what makes our stories interesting. And you're just talking about all of that because that they serve as your inspiration. So the stories that you write are more believable, are interesting, is something that we've also heard around as well. And then have taking those and then converting that into narratives.
Absolutely, because I feel like I've lived a life where I've let my imagination take over, my reality so much that I sometimes, if I look back at my childhood, I can't separate the two.
Wow.
Because I would really be very interested in
Wow.
like all these fantasy things and, uh, making a normal moment seem surreal, whether it's rain or whether it's just wind. And that's how I feel like, when I approach a screenplay, I feel like all of these small things and textures, whether it's the weather or the wind or rain or a kitten, they should be part of it.
Okay, this is, and again going back to Kamli maybe was all these elements
Yeah.
are very relevant. All of them were almost propelling the narrative forward. The rain, the sun, all the elements of nature were taking the story forward.
Yes.
Now, one thing that I want to ask, which you've already mentioned, but usme se hi there is a question that when you have songs in a film, which we know can act as blockades as well in narratives, how do you circumvent that? कि वो song does not block the film for those 2-3 minutes, and it becomes almost like a transition into something else.
I think so a lot of the bias that comes to a song is because of things that we learn or the film academically जितना पढ़ाई जाती है उसमें songs is a no-go zone.
No, absolutely.
But I feel like if you look at the films of our region, songs in music have been
Major part.
a pivotal part in and a tool for storytelling.
Of course.
Some of my favorite films from my childhood, I'm sure your childhood, would be the ones with songs.
I mean, I'm a 90s kid, so
Yeah.
the films had to have songs.
Of course. So, I took that as a very like a power that you have, कि अच्छा, and I like whenever music comes in the film, whether it's like a very intense scene, it helps me connect more to it. When something happens to
It
your
also
senses,
amplifies the emotion.
it amplifies the emotions. So I wanted to use that, and I never said कि गाने नहीं होने चाहिए इस film में, गाने निकाल दें या गाने से इसका momentum break हो रहा है. I knew कि अच्छा है, so. And the songs were beautiful. I heard a few of them. They were like, I was like, wow, we've hit a jackpot with Reshma ji ka gana hai or ye sab cheezein.
Wonderful.
And again, where it's placed in the film, I think no dialogue, no visuals could do justice to what the song does to that scene.
I felt in Kamli's situation that the song in itself it felt like, their dialogues, poetry in motion.
Yes.
So it didn't feel like the pause aaya. It felt like through that song, dialogue, emotion is being felt and you're moving forward.
Like there's certain things that I feel like you can't convey with dialogues. You can't convey with anything else other than music. Other than music and song.
Yeah.
So it's just about, placing them at the right part, writing their screenplay, as जो बाकी के 4 गाने फिल्म में आते हैं, पानी और कुंडियाँ और नैना and Kash,
that's one of my favorite songs.
Yeah, so all of them are like key moments to how Hina and Amaltas's story progresses.
Definitely.
And all of them have a different, so Pani has the whole introduction of somebody
and
who's
a prince sweeping her
yes,
out of
like somebody out of the world type situation, right? Then you move to Kundiya, where it's a Mukhra. Sorry, we call it Kundiya, but now it's called Mukhra. Yeah, and the Atif Aslam song basically.
Right.
That's a chase, that's like where you're stepping into a relation, you're like building up, but there's that back and forth.
There's a bit of tension between the two.
Yes. And then Naina is where you've sort of surrendered and you're letting your emotions take over it, I think. And Kash is the freedom that you feel after this. So there were, these are like actual beats in their stories, in the Hina Amrita's arc.
Right.
हमने songs वगैरह
So
write किए.
again, you said something very interesting, that these are actual beats in their arc. So that tells us कि किस तरह से the song can be a part of film without derailing it. एक और सवाल है इसी पे ही. Did you ever feel that the story is or will become niche versus sort of art versus commercial? क्या ये कभी भी was this a factor in your head at any time?
No. I don't see how do I categorize my work कि ये niche के लिए है या किसके
Or
लिए.
this is
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I have a very strong opinion about this. I disagree with people who say कि ये चीज़ मतलब वो कहते हैं हमें. So this happened with Kamli, after it was released, a lot of reviews that came out where we enjoyed it, but it's not for a lot of people. So I would always say to them that don't decide for other people, because the saddest thing that has happened to Pakistan TV and all is that we dumb down content thinking के audience को समझ नहीं आएगी.
कुछ नहीं बताने down. So we've just completely सब कुछ उनको feed कर
That's a tragedy. I feel like trust your audience. They know more than you. They know more than me.
And they're living the stories that you're telling as well.
Yes, and they're smart, intelligent people. Why do you think कि इनको नहीं समझ आएगी? या मैं एक certain artistic audience के लिए बना रही हूँ और सबके लिए नहीं बना रही. Let the work come out and let it find its own way. Every work does find their people, right?
Yeah. Thank you for saying that, Fatima, because I feel very vehemently about this as well, because for me, Kamli was neither art nor commercial. It was just a story.
Yeah, I really feel like films shouldn't be burdened with these things. के categories के ये art film है या वो है. I mean,
if it's a good story, that's that, I guess.
Yeah.
Right. So, Fatma, now we move on to our last segment of the interview.
Okay. Sounds like some contest happening with it.
It's going to, we have prize money on it. No, we don't have the money for it. I mean, very low budgets here. So, Fatma, I'm going to throw a few questions at you.
Okay.
You have to be quick with the answers.
Okay.
Even if you feel like the question is philosophical, the answer should not be.
Okay.
The sillier the better. The sillier the better.
Okay. Totally out of my comfort zone, but okay, I'm up for it.
Okay. One thing you'd like to change about yourself?
That I wish I had better control over my nerves.
Okay, we all do.
Yeah.
What gives you the ick? What annoys you?
When people put me into categories, when they put, the writer, like I feel like my work speaks for itself. You don't need my face with it. You don't need my personality with it.
Yeah,
so I hate it when they, say, okay, a hijabi writer came up with this film, or a girl came up with this film. I don't want to be boxed in any of these labels, whether it's a woman, whether it's, a Pakistani or anything. I don't want that.
Yeah,
I want to be I want my identity to be anonymous.
You're the writer. You want to be known.
I want the work to be known, not my
makes complete sense, Fatma. Give us an unpopular opinion of yours.
Unpopular opinion of yours? Let me think. I have a lot of unpopular opinions. I feel very strongly
this about is the time to just
a lot of these things.
About that.
I feel like the condition that everybody keeps whining about कि Pakistan में industry ऐसी है वैसी है. I feel like you allow it. Directors and producers, they allow that kind of BS to happen. Sorry, please, but Yeah. So nobody has the right to whine about it because you allow it to happen.
Yeah, sometimes they propagate it as well.
Yeah.
Cat or a dog person?
Both.
Both.
Yeah.
Okay, I would have been heartbroken if you said only cat, because
No, both.
dogs are very important for me. Sweet or savory?
Savory.
Savory, Fatma. Okay, fine. I'll live with that. Dawn or dusk?
Dawn.
Dawn.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for those answers. I'm sorry for putting you in the spot.
No. They were like, I was expecting worse. Okay,
They were okay.
They were safe.
Not perfect.
They were safe.
I wouldn't do that to you, Fatma. Right. Thank you so much, Fatma, for being here. Thank you so much for your time. I am genuinely indebted. I wanted to get into the head of a writer, and you've allowed me to do that.
No, thank you so much for having me. I hope this was, like it wasn't a complete waste.
Absolutely
I really
not.
enjoyed.
I learned so much from you here.
Thank you. That means a lot.
Thank you. So with that, it's a wrap. And please comment on what you thought about our conversation. Please do like the video and subscribe to the channel. And we'll see you soon. Take care and goodbye.